The gold-plated hands of Garrick Sterling's desk clock ticked with a heavy, metallic thud that seemed to vibrate through the cheap walnut veneer of his office desk. The air in the room was thick with the smell of stale domestic tobacco, damp carpet from the rainy Oakland winter, and the faint, chemical tang of a cooling unit on its last legs. Kiernan Ross did not sit. He stood near the door, his hands buried deep in the pockets of a grease-stained canvas utility jacket that looked as though it had spent the last 5 years in the back of an engine bay. His boots, heavy and caked with dried road salt, left faint gray outlines on the dark green carpet. Sterling, whose double chin was currently squeezed over a stiff, bleached collar that cost more than my entire weekly salary as a junior master control operator, leaned back in his leather executive chair. The chair groaned under his weight, a long, high-pitched protest of stressed vinyl. He tapped a thick, manicured fingernail against a manila folder that lay unopened between them. "I can't do it today," Kiernan, Sterling said, his voice carrying the smooth, practiced resonance of an old-school radio pitchman who had spent 30 years selling airtime to liquidators and used car syndicates. "Accounting is locked down for the quarterly audit. The girls in payroll are swamped. You know how it is. We'll get you squared away on the next billing cycle." Say, mid-December, Kiernan didn't blink. The blue light from the master control monitors down the hall reflected off his wire-rimmed glasses, casting two cold, pale squares across his eyes. He didn't offer a polite smile, nor did he shift his weight. "Mid-December is 45 days away," Garrick Kiernan said. His voice was flat, dry as pine shavings. "The invoice for the hardware reimbursement was due at noon today. $7,500, that's just the parts. Not the labor," Sterling chuckled, a wet, rattling sound that ended in a short cough. He waved his hand dismissively, his gold signet ring catching the dull light of the fluorescent tube flickering overhead. "Come on, kid, we're all family here. You think K-Bay TV is going to run off over $7,000? Look at this place. We're expanding. We just signed the Dierk TV carriage agreement. We're in the big leagues now. You're part of that. There's plenty of work coming down the pipe. Don't choke the golden goose before it can lay the egg." I stood just outside the half-open door, holding a stack of daily log sheets I had no intention of filing. My heart was thudding against my ribs, a dull, rhythmic ache. I had spent 3 weeks warning Kiernan about this exact moment. I had seen Sterling do this to the local printer who handled our promotional flyers, to the diesel mechanic who serviced our emergency generator, and to 3 different night shift engineers who had walked out when their paychecks started bouncing like rubber balls on concrete. Sterling didn't pay because he had to. He paid only when the alternative was more expensive than his greed could stomach. Kiernan reached into his jacket pocket. He didn't pull out a weapon or a legal notice. He pulled out a small, black USB drive, its metal casing scratched and dented, and set it gently on the edge of the mahogany desk. "That's the encryption key for the automated transport stream wrapper," Kiernan said quietly. Sterling frowned, his eyebrows knitting into a thick gray monobrow. The patronizing warmth in his eyes hardened into something cold and defensive. "What's that supposed to mean? The system is up." I saw the feed on the confidence monitor in the lobby. "We're broadcasting to 3 million homes in the Bay Area right now." "For now," Kiernan corrected him. "But you didn't want the $15,000 automated system. You told me to build it for half. You told me to cut corners, use consumer-grade transceivers, and bypass the Cisco edge routers. So I did. I built you a bridge out of matchsticks and dry glue, Garrick." The room grew very quiet. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic hum of the high-power transmitter on the roof, a low 60-cycle vibration that lived in the marrow of everyone who worked at K-Bay. In order to keep the SDI video feed synchronized with the Dierk TV satellite uplink without a dedicated hardware clock, Kiernan continued, his voice dropping an octave, "The system has to generate a new security handshake key every 24 hours. It's an ephemeral token. It expires at exactly 3:15 a.m. Sterling's hand stopped hovering near his desk clock. He sat up, the vinyl chair squeaking in rapid succession. "Well, then write a script to generate it automatically. You're the engineer. That's what I paid you for. You paid me $7,000 to buy the hardware on my personal credit card, which you haven't reimbursed," Kiernan said, his tone remaining terrifyingly level. "And you paid me nothing for my time. The script that generates that token doesn't run automatically. It can't. The cheap network cards you made me buy don't have enough onboard memory to store the security certificates. Every night someone has to log into the terminal, manually compile the hexadecimal wrapper, and inject it into the uplink buffer. It takes about 5 minutes. But if it isn't done by 3:14 a.m., the Direct TV receiver in Denver flags our stream as corrupted. The feed goes black. Sterling's face transitioned from a ruddy pink to the color of wet cement. He slammed both palms onto the desk, rattling the gold clock and a ceramic mug filled with cold coffee. You patch it. You patch it right now, you little punk. That's sabotage. I'll have the sheriff down here before 5 o'clock. It's not sabotage, Garrick Kiernan said, leaning forward just enough to let his shadow fall across the desk. It's budget engineering. You asked for a $7,000 car, and I built you one. It just happens to require you to crank the engine by hand every morning to keep the oil flowing. Now, you can pay me my $7,500 for the hardware, plus the $15,000 for the labor I'm owed. Or you can find someone else who knows how to compile a raw Unix kernel with proprietary satellite handshakes before 3 o'clock tomorrow morning. Sterling's chest heaved. He looked at the USB drive on the desk, then up at Kiernan. His teeth were bared, a yellow, desperate grin. I'll hire someone else. San Jose is full of tech kids who will do this for $50 and a pizza. Go ahead, Kiernan said. But while they're trying to reverse engineer my code, Direct TV's automated billing system is going to trigger Section 4.2 of your carriage contract. What was that penalty again? $10,000 for every calendar day the feed is dark. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a weaker man. Sterling's fingers twitched. He knew the contract by heart. He had spent 3 months bragging to the local papers about how he had landed the distribution deal of a lifetime. A deal that would allow him to sell late-night block programming to personal injury lawyers and regional mattress chains for 3 times his current rate. If the feed went dark on day 1, the satellite provider wouldn't just fine him. They would void the contract entirely and sue him for transponder allocation costs. For nearly a minute, the only movement in the room was the steady, rhythmic flicker of the overhead fluorescent bulb. How much? Sterling spat, the word tasting like copper in his mouth. Kiernan reached into his pocket once more and pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded in 3. He unfolded it and laid it precisely beside the USB drive. My original invoice for $7,500 for the hardware, paid in cash or cashier's check by 4 o'clock today, Kiernan said. Plus $10,000 for the completed integration work. And starting tonight, a monthly maintenance retainer of $2,000. That covers my daily 5-minute compile. If the retainer isn't in my account by the 1st of every month, I don't log in. And at 3:15 a.m., your station becomes a ghost. Sterling stared at the paper as if it were a death warrant. You're taking me to the cleaners, he whispered, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and genuine disbelief. This is extortion. No, Kiernan said, finally showing the faintest hint of a smile, a cold, sharp expression that didn't reach his eyes. This is a subscription service, Garrick. You love those. You charge your advertisers every month, don't you? Now, I suggest you head down to the Wells Fargo on San Pablo before the commercial teller window closes. 4 hours later, I was sitting in the master control room, watching the vector scope monitor display the clean, steady color bars of our primary feed. The door behind me clicked open, and Kiernan walked in. He looked exactly the same as he had that morning, except his canvas jacket was slightly heavier. In his inside pocket was an envelope containing $17,500 in cashier's checks. I turned around in my rolling chair, my jaw slack. You actually did it. You actually squeezed the bastard. Kiernan sat down on the edge of the auxiliary console, his eyes tracking the green audio levels bouncing on the program monitor. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a mathematician who had just solved a particularly tedious equation. I didn't squeeze him, Aris, Kiernan said, pulling a small screwdriver from his pocket and tightening a loose screw on the rack panel. He squeezed himself. Men like Sterling think that because they own the brick and mortar, they own the physics that make the building work. They think they can negotiate with gravity. But what about the daily compile? I asked, leaning in. Are you really going to log on at 3 in the morning every night for the next year? Kiernan tapped his temple. I wrote an automated cron job on my home server 3 weeks ago. It compiles the key, signs the certificate, and uploads it to the K-Bay router automatically every night at exactly 3:10 a.m. My eyes went wide. But, you told him? I told him it required someone to do it manually, Kiernan said, his voice dropping to a whisper as the night shift master control operator walked past the open door. And it does, my server does it. But my server doesn't work for free. And if Sterling ever decides to skip a monthly retainer, my server will simply forget the password. For the next 11 months, K-Bay TV operated with a reliability it had never seen in its 30-year history. The signal was pristine. The Diarc TV feed never dropped, not even during the heavy winter storms that knocked out the main power grid in San Leandro for 3 days. Every month, like clockwork, a $2,000 direct deposit cleared into Kiernan's account. Sterling changed. He didn't become a better man, but he became a quieter one. Whenever he walked through the master control room and saw me or any of the other low-level operators, he didn't bark orders or complain about the electric bill. He looked at the equipment racks with a kind of superstitious dread, as if he expected the steel cabinets to grow teeth and bite him if he raised his voice. He had learned, at the cost of $24,000 in maintenance fees on top of the original bill, that the cheapest way to build a house is always to pay the carpenter what he's worth the first time. On a warm evening in late October of the following year, Kiernan came back to the station. He wasn't wearing his work jacket this time. He had on a clean flannel shirt and carried a small cardboard box filled with documentation binders. I was sitting at the desk, logging transmitter readings. "What's all this?" I asked. Kiernan set the box down on the console. "It's the system manual, the source code, the network topology, and the administrative passwords." I'm handing it over. I looked up at him confused. "Why, you're making $2 grand a month for doing absolutely nothing. Why stop now?" "Because he's paid enough," Kiernan said, his eyes scanning the glowing dials of the transmitter rack one last time. "He paid double what the job was worth because he tried to pay half. If I keep taking his money now, it's not a lesson anymore. It's just greed. And I don't ever want to look in the mirror and see Garrick Sterling looking back at me." He walked down the hall to Sterling's office, left the box on his desk, and walked out into the cool Oakland night without saying goodbye. The next morning, Sterling came into master control. He looked older, his shoulders slightly hunched, his expensive silk tie slightly crooked. He stood behind my chair for a long time, watching the digital clock on the wall tick toward 3:15 a.m. "Is it going to go dark?" he asked, his voice lacking any of its old theatrical boom. "No, Garrick," I said, pointing to the green light on the primary encoder rack. Kiernan left the keys. "The script is running locally now. It's ours." Sterling stared at the blinking green light for a long time. He didn't smile and he didn't swear. He just nodded once, a slow, heavy movement of his head, and walked back to his empty office, leaving the door wide open.